Slow days were common in rural Iowa. I worked in a little town that made you wonder if anything truly happened here. That night, after a long stretch of silence, my radio crackled to life. "You there, officer?" It was Bill Hastings, a down-to-earth farmer whose acreage extended for miles beyond the town boundaries, steady and not overly dramatic. He wasn't just calling. If he was, my neighbors seemed to be gone. I exhaled and massaged my temple. Who the Barnes household? It's been 2 weeks since I last saw them. The house is as lit up as it was last night, so I assumed they could have gone on vacation. Car still there, livestock still caged up. Something is wrong, the Barnes household. At the very least, I was aware of them, a modest, nondescript family. To the best of my knowledge, they never caused any problems. Always kind at the grocery store and smiling at church. The married couple has 2 children. They appear to have been taken directly from the standard Rockwell paintings, not the type of individuals you're concerned about. Perhaps they had a family emergency and had to leave quickly. Perhaps, Bill answered, but his tone was unconvinced. Nor was I, after telling him I would investigate. I turned my cruiser onto the freeway and headed west. The view was dull and the travel was lengthy. Wind turbines slowly rotating like skeletal sentinels in the horizon as expanses of golden fields roll endlessly in all directions. I saw fewer indications of life the deeper I went, just barren tracts of countryside with the occasional crow perched on a fence post, no automobiles, no houses. A fine mist had started to crawl over the fields, whirling in the path of my headlights as I turned into the narrow dirt road that led to the Barnes property. Deep oranges and purples were leaking into the sky as the sun began to set, casting lengthy shadows over the landscape. Like a lighthouse in the night, the mansion was illuminated like a dollhouse set up for no one. Warm golden light radiated from every window. As the abrupt silence closed in around me, I killed the engine. The cornstalks at the edge of the land were rustled by the increased wind, their parched leaves muttering like invisible voices. As I exited the cruiser, the gravel crunched beneath my boots. The air was heavy and silent now that the wind had subsided. The insects had stopped talking as well. An automobile was parked in the driveway. I walked over and looked at the old Ford. It appeared to have been sitting there for a while because the tires were buried in the ground beneath it. That disturbed me for some reason. A household this remote would regularly work and go to the shops. As I went on to the porch, I tightened my belt and rested one hand on the holster at my hip. My weight caused the timber to creak. I knocked twice. Barnes. Mr. Barnes. Mrs. No response. I banged louder this time. Nothing. I took a look out the windows. Nothing was visible. Through the drawn drapes I gave the doorknob a try. Unlocked. With a gentle creak, the door opened, showing the dimly lighted hallway outside, a hint of grilled meat and a slightly herbaceous scent. Perhaps rosemary clung in the air. Everything appeared normal at first. The floors were immaculate, no muddy boot prints from the farm, no dust, no movement at all. Everything was positioned precisely, sterilized but cozy. I entered and closed the door after myself. The quiet was heavy. I yelled once more. It didn't echo when I spoke. The sound was swallowed by the house. My boots scarcely made a sound on the shiny wood. As I walked cautiously down the corridor, there was nothing amiss. So far, there is no indication of a break-in. The lights were on, though. It was warm in the house. It must have been a recent visitor. I stopped dead as soon as I entered the dining room. Around the table sat the Barnes family, father, mother, and 2 kids. Their hands were folded neatly on the wooden surface, and their heads were bent forward, not moving. The food before them was very fresh but undamaged. My heart began to race. My initial reaction was to approach them, feel their pulses, and speak. However I didn't. I was kept in place by something. There was a weight and pressure in the air, like if I had entered something invisible. I made myself move forward a little. I glanced around the room and noticed deep, irregular gashes in the wood above the dinner table, etched into the ceiling. A pentagram was what it was. I walked slowly in the direction of the table, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. 4 individuals. However, there were 5 plates. It hadn't occurred to me until my gaze fell upon the vacant chair. Like every other plate, this one was set to perfection. However, there was nobody seated there. I forced my breath to steady as I gulped hard and turned back to the bodies I needed to be certain. I went up to the father first and put my hand on his wrist. He had cool, rigid skin without a pulse. He kept his head down. I treated the mother in the same way, the same outcome.
And the children. They had passed away. I pushed myself to stand, moving away from the table as my body ached from an unidentified source. I had to make this call as quickly as I could. With a strained voice, I clicked my radio. I need backup at the Barnes property. This is Officer Brims. No indications of struggle, 4 dead. But there's a problem. Static crackled, and then the dispatcher's authoritative yet calm voice could be heard. The closest unit is 25 minutes away. Brims.
I rubbed the bridge of my nose and exhaled slowly. 25 minutes, an eternity. In such a home, I steadied my grip on my belt. I had an option. I could continue searching or wait outside till backup came. I looked back at the chair that was vacant. I had to inspect the remainder of the house. Its first floor was immaculate. There were no outerwear by the door, no toys left, strewn about the den, no dishes in the sink, and no dust on the shelves. Not a trace of everyday life. When I opened the refrigerator, it was also full. Everything was fresh and undamaged. This did not appear to be a residence that had experienced internal strife, at least not at first glance. Actually, it appeared that they had been living perfectly, up until the point at which I intervened. I turned to face the steps. My jaw tightened. I had to look on the second story. My boots were too noisy on the hardwood. As I approached them, the atmosphere seemed heavier. The first few steps appeared to be utilized more frequently than the others I noticed. They were right. As though they had been used 1,000 times, their edges became smooth. The first step I took, then the second. Nothing stopped me, which surprised me a little. I walked carefully to the second floor. At that moment I noticed the first indication that this mansion wasn't as pristine as it appeared. The first floor was different from the upper. In front of me was a long, narrow hallway with doors on either side. The facade of a flawless house was dissolving. The first floor was immaculately kept, but this one appeared to have been abandoned for a while. There was dust on the baseboards. The air had a slight dampness to it, like rotting wood in an old attic. All of the doors were closed, but a few had little openings where they hadn't been pulled all the way. Then I noticed it. On the entryway table is a framed picture. Something about it made my stomach knot right away. Even though it shouldn't have drawn my attention in that way, I moved in closer. Just as I had discovered them downstairs, the Barnes family was seated at the dinner table. However, there was another element in the image. When I grabbed for it, my fingers twitched. The 5th seat wasn't vacant. Something was seated within it, a little ugly, uneven, and deformed mound of flesh. No human. It resembled a toddler in general outline, but its limbs were enlarged, bulbous, and abnormal. It appeared as though something beneath the skin was pressing outward in a desperate attempt to escape, since the flesh was too stretched and bulging in some spots. The family was grinning, their eyes wide, their teeth bared. I put the picture back down carefully. I went by some locked doors, particularly in children's rooms. They had time to wait. One door at the end of the hall was ajar a little. The main bedroom, the fragrance assaulted me as soon as I entered. Copper, unmistakable, thick and sharp. Blood, lots of stuff. My eyes fell on the bed and my breath stuck in my throat. As a police officer, you witness a lot of things, but every gore scene is as powerful as the first seeing death, or simply a location where something has died is something you never get used to. It makes a lasting impression. The mattress, the sheets, and even the floor underneath it were all soggy and dark. My skin crawled as the stain crept outward in a pattern that extended well beyond the doorframe. However, there was no body or an indication of conflict. All that was left was a puddle of blood, and the horrifying, overwhelming knowledge that someone had bled out here. Being cautious, not to let my boots dig too deeply into the carpet, I took a step forward. My instincts told me to get out, to go back, to wait for help. However I repressed them, I always did. I had to comprehend. I looked over to the bedside table. There, open and waiting, was a little black book with a leather binding, a diary. Flipping back to the first few pages, I took it up. March 4th, March 4. He was lost. He was lost. He was lost. He was lost. According to the doctor, it was painless and swift.
How would they know, though, the sound of his final breath is unknown to them? His fingers fell slack in mine, and they have no idea how that felt. They had no idea how his eyes stared at me without seeing me. This is not something I can accomplish. I am unable to. March 5th. The remainder of the page was severely scraped out. The words were cut through with deep black ink, making them unintelligible. March 14th. I discovered something. I believe it will succeed. I looked everywhere.
Churches, grieving support groups, therapists and hospitals, but none knew the answers. I needed something that no one had, by the grace of God. However, I was able to locate it in a book older than the town itself, hidden away in a library archive. My fingers were shaking as I read the passage 12 times. It is necessary to claim the body, call the deceased's name, and send out an invitation in order to unbury them. If the will is powerful enough, the flesh will respond. I still don't fully comprehend it. However, I will. March 17. Today I visited his tomb. March 19th. The others are unable to comprehend. They say that I need help, that I'm losing myself, and that I should stop obsessing and concentrate on my remaining children. They're not understanding. I would never advise them to cease their search if this was one of them. Tonight I returned to the grave. I excavated. March 29th. It's functioning. He has returned. I sense his might now. I don't think he knows how to return home yet, but he's getting closer. According to the book, the last step calls for an offering, something of our flesh perhaps. Although it doesn't specify how much, I believe I now understand. Whatever it takes, we'll do it. April 1st. The last step is tomorrow. The home is ready, the offering is ready, and the table is set. I sense his anticipation. He will be welcomed home by us. April 2. It was successful. He returned. We are entire once more. A breath that I had not realized I was holding shivered out of me as I let the journal fall from my fingers. I turned to face the bed, covered in blood. Here they had done something. I kept thinking about that bulk I had seen in the photo. Was it the kid they had returned with? The door creaked open, downstairs. I went cold. I thought for a moment that I had dreamed it. Then there was a sound. A rattling, damp, low breath had surged through the whole house. I gripped my revolver more tightly. Everywhere, not just in the room, the air changed like old bones flexing. The walls moaned. Above me, there was a deep, strange groan. As the wooden beams rested, I heard a shuddering sound coming from everywhere in the house, not just one direction. With my rifle up, I stepped toward the door. The sound of my boots on the floor was too loud. A baby's voice that sounds terrible. It was not a typical voice, not the voice of a real baby. It sounded deep, sluggish, low and distorted, like something attempting but failing to imitate a baby's voice. Then the whole house trembled. There was a strong vibration underfoot to begin with, only one. Suddenly and violently, as if something enormous had moved beneath the foundation. The ceiling light bulb flickered. Then I heard chairs scraping the floor from downstairs. Softly, as though something had just sat down, the plates clattered. I felt a sickening sensation creep up my back. I grabbed my rifle so hard that my fingers hurt. I moved slowly, keeping it level in front of me. Officer Brims is here. I forced my voice to remain steady and continued, "If anyone is here, make your presence known." There was no reply. The wood creaked under my weight as I went down the stairs, one step at a time. I had not previously noticed the stench, decay, and damp rot. I made it to the bottom step. The dining room was beyond the archway. I could hear the table, even though I couldn't see it yet. wet, smacking lips, chewing and breathing heavily and laboriously. It sounded like it was eating, and there was something sitting there. I sat at the table, bent over a plate of unfinished food after turning the corner. What was it? Not quite a baby, but a baby. It was enormous. Its flesh stretched too tightly over a bloated, changing form, causing it to bulge and pulse. The skin trembled as though something beneath was attempting to escape. It was smooth and pale, with purple veins running through it. Its fingers ended in blunt, swollen stubs, and its arms were large and meaty. It was larger than the photo showed. If it was the same object, it was much larger. Grease smeared across its wet, sagging lips as it slurped and swallowed, gnawing hungrily as it shoved food into its mouth. Like it was attempting to fill an endless void, I could hear it eating in large, heavy gulps. Beneath it, the chair splintered and creaked. Under its impossibly heavy weight, the wooden frame slid into the ground. It was too bloated to move and too big to sit comfortably here on the first floor. It was trapped. The second floor was in that state for that reason. Then it came to a halt. Its slack mouth paused in mid-motion, its hand froze over the plate, and the gnashing of its teeth abruptly stopped. The room was filled with quiet. Then slowly its head turned. It moved mechanically and unnaturally, as if the muscles in its neck weren't functioning properly. Like something reorganizing itself inside the flesh, rippled along the side of its throat. Then it noticed me. Its soulless black eyes met mine. It screamed as its mouth opened. It was not a human sound that emerged. It was not even a creature, like something drowning in its own throat. It was thick, gurgling and wet, a roar that tore through my eardrums, bubbling and suffocating. The lights flickered, and the plate wobbled on the table. Then it lunged as its massive, swollen form rushed forward. The table beneath it splintered into pieces of wood I let go. One strike sent a mass, followed by another. The gunfire was thunderous as it boomed through the house, and it continued. As though I had shot into a rotten, swollen carcass, the bullet vanished with thick, moist patches after sinking into its flesh like mud. It did not recoil. I took off running, breathless. My boots crashing to the ground, I pivoted on my heel and ran through the archway. I could hear it following behind me, dragging, sliding, and shattering objects. The home trembled, and the walls moaned. I was so concentrated on establishing distance that I didn't turn around. I bounded past the stairs and toward the front door down the hall. The house shook strongly again as soon as my fingertips touched the doorknob, as if a large object had struck it from the inside. The walls gave way, the windows broke, and the lights exploded into sparkles. From the outside, tires screeched, and flashes of blue and red decorated the house's walls. The backup had come. I sensed it directly behind me. For a moment my body froze. At that moment I was surrounded by gunshots. Shotgun explosions and a deafening volley of bullets ripped through the windows, the walls, and the structure itself. Unlike previously, it yelled. It was different this time. I had heard a gurgling infantile sound in the dining room, but this was not it. This was primordial, akin to something discovering for the first time that it was susceptible to harm. I then lifted my own weapon and fired all of my rounds. As if the whole building were collapsing in on itself, the walls bowed inward, and the windows blasted forth raining glass. The object was convulsing when I hit the floor, as though the flesh itself was attempting to scuttle away from the gunshots. A huge, protruding body rippled. However, the police continued to fire. The air filled with gunpowder smoke and the pungent smell of burned flesh as the rounds and shots continued. It trembled, spasmed, and shuddered. Then, like a rotting pumpkin that has been exposed to the sun for too long, its massive body sagged and crumbled in on itself. The house groaned one more time, deep and horrible. As the dust settled, I laid on my back, breathing heavily, and gazed up at the ceiling. I was pulled up by someone who grasped my arm. "Geez, Rims, how are you?" I looked at another voice. Officer Delgado was there, his weapon still half raised, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open in amazement. Without a single word to anyone, I got up and left. I sat in my cruiser, still smeared with stuff I didn't want to mention, dried sweat and soot. Beside me, watching the blaze eat away at little remained of the Barnes house, was the lead investigator, a man I had never seen that morning, with greying hair, a stiff suit, and eyes too worn to be keen. After taking a deep suck from his cigarette and letting it out, he turned to face me. "Don't remember this ever occurred?" Even before the sun rose, the clean-up got underway. The home was already a husk, hollowed out, emptied, and devoid of everything that connected it to what had transpired inside. By the time the first signs of morning appeared on the field, there were no coroner's reports or remains removed, only unmarked black trucks, arriving officers who refused to look me in the eye, and guys in plain uniforms moving with uncanny accuracy. Within an hour, the house was destroyed by fire, and the family of the barn was buried. A silent obituary describing a terrible accident. A gas leak or the death of an entire family appeared in the newspaper. It was as if everything was within, had to be, destroyed, burned off the ground, and the soil itself salted to prevent anything from ever growing there again. I've buried more cases than I can remember over the years, but this one remained